So I'm delighted to be back with you today so that we can continue on with our discussion of the introduction of the first 4 chapters of the Science of Mind textbook. And this week we are working on the 3rd chapter, what it does. And what I would like to do, of course, every time I read the chapter, every time I go through the chapters, something different speaks to me. I think I read it once yesterday and twice this morning, and this morning I opened it up for the 3rd time, and when I looked in there, there were paragraphs that it seemed I had overlooked before. So it's just that kind of a book that you can pick up and you can read over and over and over again. And wherever you are at that moment in time, you'll get something different out of it. We're going to talk a little bit this morning. I'm just going to put out a couple of different ideas and then kind of tie them together into the direction that I think this chapter is taking us. In this chapter, I believe that Ernest comes about as close as he comes in all of the rest of the textbook to the mystical. Now, he's always described the science of mind as practical mysticism, and we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by that? I always like to ask, well, what do we mean before we go off too far on assumptions? And he said a mystic is not a mysterious person, but a mystic is an individual who very, very definitely and deeply feels the presence of the divine. That was his simple definition of mysticism and what a mystic is. And during his public life, he didn't talk very much about the mystical. And one of his biographers said it was because Ernest didn't want people to perceive him as being so very different than the rest of us. If they thought he was some type of a mysterious person who levitated while he meditated or things like that, they would think, well, this was weird, this was strange. And I'm not saying he levitated, I'm just saying that that's what people believe when they hear about mystics. He wanted people to understand that what we're talking about is very natural, it is very normal. It is our normal state of being in the presence, being in the love of God, feeling the love of God as a tangible presence with us, observing its activity in, as, and through our lives. So he didn't talk very much about his personal mystical experiences. But there's one documented case when he was at a ceremony. I guess it was chartering of a new church in L.A. or the installation of the pastor. I'm not sure which. But he was speaking. He was a keynote speaker, and he was speaking. And in the midst of his presentation, he stopped, and everybody wondered what was wrong with him. And he said something to the effect of, oh my, I see it now. The veil is very thin. And he sat down, and they had to, another speaker had to get up, and they continued on with the program. But the people who went to him right after he sat down and talked to him, asked him, are you okay? What's going on? And he said what he described to them was a flash of cosmic consciousness is the way he called it. And that's what Richard Maurice Buck called it in his book. And Ernest said that at that moment that he was speaking, the physical world that was before his eyes kind of dissolved. And instead of seeing human beings sitting in front of him, he could see just little bundles of light. He could see what he perceived to be the spirits of the people, the soul of the people. And he could see that, truly we are spiritual beings. And that kind of overwhelmed him at the moment. So he never personally talked publicly about those things because he didn't want to be perceived as being weird or mysterious. But I believe in this chapter what he's telling us, if you go back and read this chapter, is he is telling us that there is a presence, there is an intelligence, there is a love, there is a power, there is a kindness, there is that which we call God, for lack of a better term. It is the thing itself, and it is here, it is now. And it's not just that it is around us or we can see signs of its activity around us. It is here. All of it is here. Not just some of it is here, but all of it is here. And it is available to us to the degree that we make ourselves available to it. And we can experience it. And it then becomes the motive force of our life. It becomes the doer that does the works. In New Testament theology, Jesus said, it is not me, it is not I, but it is the Father within me that does the work. Joel Goldsmith in his teaching says, one of our big problems is that we think that I, Jim, or I, Joel, or I, whatever our name happens to be, that I is a real entity that is somehow separated from and different from and apart from the I am of the Old Testament, the I am that is God. And our growth, as we continue to grow, our growth is really about eliminating that idea of separation to the point where I feel at times it's kind of like an identity crisis. Who am I, or am I not? And is the I am really the I in me? And that seems to be the case. Yes, the I am is the I in me. So who am I? Am I Jim? Or am I an individualized expression of the divine that is expressing itself as Jim? In other words, the soul that I am. I did not create, my parents did not create. It was created by the only creator, the one creator, out of itself. So the first point I want to make is as we kind of go through this chapter, as you read this chapter, hopefully over the day or the week, is to get this sense of it's here, it is with us, it is nearer than our hands and feet, it is closer than our breath. It is, as the poet said, waiting in quiet repose for us to make to discovery. So we come to this chapter again, and so we do this every year. We go back to the basics, and there's a reason for that. There's an old saying, you can't step into the same stream twice. Now, on the physical level, it makes sense. You say, well, technically the water that was there the last time I stepped in it, that water's gone. Say that water has flowed downstream and it's gone wherever it goes, to a lake or to a river or to the ocean. So the stream I stepped in yesterday is gone. And the stream that I step in today is, even though it looks much the same, it is really an entirely different stream in that all the water molecules are different. They are different water molecules. So we can kind of work around those technical issues and say, yeah, I can understand that. It's really not the same stream because it's a different body of water. Following the same path, but a different body of water. But the other way of looking at that is I'm not the same person I was yesterday. See, I have changed. Not only is my physical body not the same body I had yesterday, right? Old cells have died off and new cells have come into being. But intellectually, I've learned new things. Emotionally, I feel different things. And spiritually, I have changed. So kind of get this image then that everything is fluid. Everything is fluid. We go through life and we want everything to be the same, but the nature of things is that everything is fluid. In Buddhism, they would say everything is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. One of the things that they would do with their monks in training is send them down to the crematoriums and have them meditate upon the burning bodies. And the reason for that was so they really, really got it into their heads that everything is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. Everything is fluid. So we come back every year and we re-examine these ideas because everything is fluid. We have changed. The circumstances of our lives have changed. We have changed. And when we open that book again and we read that book, we find in there something that is appropriate for us today at this point in time. And when we read it again in another year, we will get something different out of it, you know. It would be very boring if we opened the book year after year and saw exactly the same thing. You know, it would be like, you know, the story you hear, the difference between having 25 years experience or having 1 year's experience 25 times. There should be growth. There should be change. There should be movement year after year. See, all of life is changing. All of life is growing. And all of life is moving forward. If we look at this thing called evolution and we look at its nature, it seems to be progressively moving life forward. And I would say three axes, if we want to call them that, if we tried to put them on a graph and plot them. You know, we go from the mineral, where there is an intelligence in there, a chemical intelligence, but there's an intelligence. There's electrons and protons and neutrons, and there's molecules, and they're bonding, and there's all kinds of things going on. But its primary characteristics is inertia, right? Minerals just stay wherever they are. They don't typically move themselves very much. They may migrate chemically a little bit, but they don't have arms and legs and feet and get up and move. And certainly the intelligence that we're talking about that is functioning in the rocks is not to the degree of the intelligence functioning in higher order mammals, the humans and the dolphins and elephants and creatures like that. So life evolves the next step, and it goes from the mineral, it goes into the vegetable, you know. And you can even see this, you know, the roots of the vegetables kind of sucking the minerals up out of the soil. And that which was the mineral life now is altered and changed in its expression. And the plants move a little bit, you know. They can turn, some of them can turn, sunflowers turn and face the sun as it crosses the sky. There seems to be a higher degree of intelligence in them, you know. They may have strategies. Again, a lot of it's chemical, but they may have strategies for withstanding a drought, you know, for what to do in between rains, and all of these kind of things that they have learned through evolution. They have learned to adapt to their environment. And then, of course, we move on to the animal kingdom, and now we find a greater deal of movement. You know, the fish swim, the birds fly, the animals walk through the forest, and a greater degree of intelligence. You know, you see the YouTube videos of the crows kind of bending paper clips and making tools, and now the anthropologists are saying that some of the stone tools that they were looking at from years and years ago that they thought humans had made may have actually been made by monkeys. That it's possible that they were making stone tools. And I'm only saying that because it shows a greater degree of intelligence, you know. It shows a greater degree of intelligence, and each step shows a greater degree of freedom of movement. So the rocks can't move very much, the plants move just a little bit, the animals move even more. And then we get into the human, and the human, we like to say, and that we are the pinnacle of God's creation, because we said so. That's why I'm chuckling. But we don't know. We don't know for sure. I mean, it's possible that there are other creatures somewhere, other parts of God's creation, perhaps even here on this earth. You know, some people will say that the dolphins are much smarter than we give them credit for. And I think there's something to that when you look into their eyes. There's something in there. There's a sentient being, it seems, in there looking back at you. There's something that's responding, like unto like. But as far as we know, or at least as far as we can declare about ourselves, we have a greater degree of freedom and a greater degree of intelligence than the rest of the animals, the vegetables, the minerals. Okay, we can build machines to increase our freedom to move. We have methods of learning and all these things. And the third axis, other than intelligence and movement, is self-awareness. We as human beings, we have the ability, whether we exercise or not, but we have the ability to be self-aware. So life is kind of moving us forward, and it makes sense. All of this is just by way of explaining that it makes sense that we should come back from time to time. We should review from time to time, and we should expect that when we do this, that we get something new and different out, because we are at a new and different place in the evolution of our soul. I know I've told you that I used to fly sailplanes years ago, and when you're working a thermal, or a rising column of air, of course, if you've ever seen a big puffy cloud in the sky, you've seen the top of a thermal. The air rises up until it reaches the condensation point, because as air rises, it cools. And when it gets cool enough, the moisture that was in the air kind of condenses out and forms a cloud. And as you're flying in a sailplane, you look for these things, and you try to get underneath them and just fly in a circle, kind of like the hawks do. And with every turn, you're going up. So you're not just making a flat turn. It's like going up, almost like a corkscrew, going up, and we're spiraling up and up and up, and closer to the cloud base. And the evolution of our soul, the growth of our soul, is like that. Hopefully, it's like that. Every year we come back around, but we're at a different place. We've grown a little bit closer to the presence. We've grown a little bit deeper in our understanding. We've grown a little bit stronger in our feeling of the presence of God. Now, another idea that we want to consider is this idea of mankind discovering how things work and then cooperating with the way things work, kind of using the law. So Dr. Holmes tells us in a chapter that we don't create laws, but we discover them and we use them. So if you think about gravity, this is one of my favorite examples, because when I was a kid growing up, we were mistakenly under the impression that Isaac Newton invented gravity, and he didn't invent gravity. He didn't discover gravity. Gravity had been around forever, and people knew that there was something that made objects fall. They knew that there was something that made water go downhill. They knew how to build a set of scales that would balance. They knew how to work with gravity, even though they could not describe with mathematical precision the attraction of gravity. So what Newton did was he came along and he was able to describe that attraction in a mathematical formula. He was able to say these are how things are drawn together. These are how things accelerate together. These are how things accelerate when they're pulled together by this force of attraction. And of course, in doing that, he also invented the mathematical science of calculus, which has enabled us to do many different things that we couldn't have done before, including building rocket ships that could escape the gravitational force of the Earth. So before Newton, people were building water wheels. They were building fish wheels. Out in Arizona, if you get a chance to go out in the Phoenix area, there's a national park out there. I think they call it Montezuma's Castle. There's a national park out there where they have the remains of some of the Anasais, the ancient people, the people that were there even before the Hopi Indians. And they built their village along the side of a stream. The water was flowing downstream, and they dug a ditch to divert it, and they let that water run through the fields and irrigate the fields where they grew their crops. And today, the farmers who are working those fields today are still using some of those ditches that have been dug, thousands of years ago. Here, where I live in Rock Hill, South Carolina, I can go to either of the two rivers on either side of the county, and there are devices there called fish weirs that the Native American people built, where basically they stack rocks up in the stream and form an inverted V against the flow of the stream, and then the fish moving up and down river have to go through that narrow opening at the peak of the V, and the people who need fish just stand right there and catch them. So people understood. They understood that the water was going to flow. They understood how to cooperate with it. They may not know exactly why the water was flowing. They could not have sat down with a pencil and paper and drawn out a mathematical formula, but they knew enough about it to work with it. An interesting thing to me here is we still don't know what gravity is. We know how it works. We can describe it mathematically. We can understand it well enough to be able to send our rocket ships into outer space and know where they're going to be and be able to land them on the surface of another heavenly body out there. But yet we still don't know exactly what it is. Right? So we know how it works. We don't know why it works. Einstein says it's not really an attraction of two things. It's because space and time is curved, and things are falling together in that curvature of space and time. And I've looked at that a dozen times, and I still don't understand the explanation. It kind of goes beyond me. But yet his theory of relativity is true enough that we have to adjust the signals from our GPS satellites to take into effect the distortion of time in space. So all I'm saying is we do not create the laws. The laws are there. We discover the laws, and we learn how to work with them, even if we don't understand why they work, even if they don't understand why they work. We don't need to know why. We need to know that they're there. We need to know that they work. And we need to know how to cooperate with them. So we need to work with them according to the way that they work. We're not going to get them to work the way that we want them to work. If we want the water to turn our water wheel, we have to put the water wheel into the stream. We have to build it in such a way that the paddles will catch the stream, and the flow of the stream can then push against the paddle and make that water wheel turn. We try to put our water wheel up on dry land, it won't do us any good, because that's not the way that gravity works. That's not the way that the flow of the stream works. Last point I want to go to before we kind of see how this all fits together into this chapter is when I was a kid growing up in the 50s, TV was pretty new invention. And if you're of that age, why you probably remember, like I do, Saturday mornings, sitting in front of this big TV, whether it was a metal cabinet or a wooden cabinet. We had the vacuum tubes in there, and I had this big TV. Ours was black and white for many years. I don't think we got a color TV until I was in my teens. And of course, watching the TV shows, Fury and Flicka and Tom and Jerry and Sky King and all the great shows that we grew up with on a Saturday morning. And one TV show that I really enjoyed, you may remember, was Mr. Wizard. Mr. Wizard was a school teacher, science teacher, and he had a TV show, and he would bring some of the school kids out, and they would always do these cool little school kid experiments, what the kids were working on, and the different things that they could do. Letterman kind of did it in his late night show. He would bring the kids out like once a year. He would bring the kids who had won a science contest out, and they would demonstrate their experiments on the Late Show with David Letterman. But one thing that Mr. Wizard did that I remember that fits into what we're talking about today was to take a glass of water and ask if you could think of a way to stick your finger down, dip your finger into that glass of water without getting your finger wet, And Chris, in my neighborhood, once we learned the trick, it became a small business opportunity. We bet somebody, I'll bet you $20 that I can do this. But think about the question, think about the problem, how can you take your finger and stick your finger down into the water that's inside the glass in front of you without your finger getting wet? And the answer to the problem, the way that he did it, was he had a little can of baby powder there, a little talcum powder. And he sprinkled a layer of talcum powder on top of the water. So that there was a glass of water and the talcum powder was floating on it. And if you do that, and if you stick your finger down through the talcum powder and into the water, what happens is the talcum powder wraps itself around your finger. And it insulates your finger from the water. So the water, goes to the outside of the talcum powder that is attached to your finger, but your finger remains dry. Now I know you're saying, what in the world has that got to do with chapter 3 to the introduction of the textbook? And here's what came to me with that. See, the water is there. It is available. Its nature is to make things wet. And it is ready, it is willing, and it is able to do so. And we have our finger in the water, and our finger is surrounded by and immersed in the water. Yet our finger can't get wet because there's something blocking it. There's something insulating it from the water. Now, it's not the water's fault. If there's any fault at all to be had, it's not the water's fault that our finger isn't getting wet. Our finger doesn't have the ability to get wet because that ability is being impeded by the layer of talcum powder. Now, if we think about for a moment that we are completely surrounded by and immersed in the presence of God, that all of the qualities of God are around us, the omnipotence, all of the power of God is here. It is omnipresent. All of the wisdom and all of the intelligence of God is here, the omniscience. It is completely surrounding us. We are completely immersed in it. It is the very essence of what we are. Yet we are insulated from it. We are isolated from it. We can't realize it, as Joel Goldsmith would say. We can't realize it, or we haven't realized it. By our ignorance, see, by our belief in separation. Dr. Holmes says there's really one problem that all of mankind is facing, and that is this belief in separation. We believe that somehow God is out there and we're over here, and we believe that somehow we are not part of it, And whether it's a dogma or creed that tells you that due to original sin we are not have separated from God, we've been cast out of the garden, and all of these other images that we've been given, these are all beliefs. These are all ideas. Right? There's just, for the sake of clarification, there's another teaching, another way of thinking that says we left the garden. We left the garden willingly. We left the garden willingly to go out and to have the experience of life. We deliberately chose to forget everything that we knew, or most everything that we knew, about the goodness of God, about the peace of God, about the love of God, so that we could go forth into the world and have this experience. And in that teaching, the Garden of Eden is not a physical place here on earth. It is a place in a previous experience, in a previous place, whether you would call it heaven or what, I don't know, but just a previous existence where the soul decided to incarnate for some particular purpose and agreed to temporarily forego all of its knowledge. So we look at that and say, well, why would that be? How could that be, And we come to this realization that the divine is expressing itself through all of its creation, through the minerals, through the vegetables, through the animals, and through us. And it is expressing itself in every possible way. And in order to do that, it had to leave us alone in this kind of self-imposed ignorance, if we want to call it that, so that we could rediscover it. We could rediscover it little by little, bit by bit, in our own unique way. And in so doing, we create our individuality. We create our uniqueness, And this is how God is expressing itself in every way possible, because we are all individual. We are all unique. We all discover things in a little different pace, in a little different way. And to some people, the visual appeals, and to some people, the auditory appeals. So we find then that all of God is everywhere present. And yet human beings find themselves weak, tired, and afraid. This was on the first page of the introduction. And Science of Mind, the teaching Science of Mind, deals with this. And why do we find ourselves weak, tired, and afraid when we're surrounded by all peace, all power, all poise, all intelligence? And it's because we haven't yet accepted it. We haven't received it. We haven't created a little hole in that insulating layer of talcum powder on our skin. We haven't created a little hole in that insulating layer of ignorance to allow the presence and the activity of God to manifest itself more completely in our experience. Now, what creates that hole? What allows us to create that opening, create that hole through which God's good can flow more fully into our consciousness, right? And it's our intention. We have to want to do that. You have to know it's there. You have to want to do it. And it's our faith. Do we really believe that? Right? It's done unto you according to your belief. Do you really believe that? Do you really believe that the love of God will flow more completely into your life if you can attune your consciousness, if you can create this greater opening? And Dr. Holmes tells us the good news is that faith is something that can be developed. Right? And this is a very, very important point. A lot of times people will say, well, if I believed, I would be having a different experience. So I must not believe, but I can't change my belief because that's the way I am. See, that's the way I was raised, that's the way I was taught, and that's the way I am. And I have to somehow, I would have to somehow go into my psyche and find out where I adopted this false belief and dig it up and destroy it. Right? That's kind of like a psychoanalysis look at it. And Dr. Holmes would say, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that, because as your consciousness is exposed to the truth, that which is not true goes away. That which is not true dissolves. It dissolves into the nothingness from which it came. And the example we use with that over and over again is the light and the darkness. It doesn't matter how long the room has been dark. It doesn't matter who turned out the light. As soon as anyone lights the candle, the darkness dispels. The darkness doesn't put up a struggle. You don't hear it groan. You don't hear it moan. It is just dispersed. In fact, if you were in a room that was very dark and you sealed off all of the doors and windows with a heavy black cloth, so it was pitch black in that room, and you lit the candle, the darkness would be dispelled, and the darkness had no way of leaving. See? It couldn't slide out under the crack of the door because that was sealed. It couldn't slide out around the window because that was sealed. See, the darkness was an experience, but it was not a real condition. It did not have the power to sustain itself. So if we consider that in our consciousness we, excuse me, we have adopted many ideas that are not true, limiting ideas, ideas of separation, ideas of lack, ideas of war, ideas of hate, and all of these other things that the human collective consciousness has accepted, they're not true. See? They're not of God. They're not of our very nature. They are of our creation out of ignorance. And they are dispelled to the degree that we allow the light in, that we allow the truth in. So faith can be developed. We have to have our intention. What is it that you want to experience? Right? What is it that you want to have happen in your life? What is it that you want? How is it that you want to know God more fully today? What is your intention? And then how do you develop your faith? How do you develop faith that this is happening? And Dr. Holmes tells us that faith is developed through understanding the theory, right? Education, and practice, proving the theory, education and practice. And I'll give you an example from my own life when I was a student and I was studying basic electrical theory and electronics, and I guess everybody everywhere that ever worked in the fields that I worked in had to go through these things. And we had to study some very simple concepts, Ohm's law. And Ohm's law tells us that there is a relationship between the level of voltage, the level of current, and the level of resistance in any electrical circuit. And you can write that out. E equals IR. You got to learn that. E equals IR, and you had to make every iteration of it. You had to move everything, or E over I equals R, and all those kind of things, or EI equals R, however it would transpose. So we got the theory. The theory is that there is a direct relationship between the voltage level, the resistance, and the current in an electrical circuit. And if you understood any two, you could figure out the third. And then the way they had us test it was we had little breadboard boxes, where you could connect electrical components together with wires and in a very easy fashion. You had a couple of flashlight batteries or a 9-volt battery, and you had a volt ohm meter that you could measure. You could measure current, you could measure resistance, and you could measure voltage in the circuit with this multimeter. And what they would have us do is just go over to the parts bin and select a couple components at random and assemble them in a circuit in some way. Draw the circuit out on a piece of paper and then do the calculations. Well, I know my battery has this many volts and I've got these different resistors around here, and they should have this much current flowing through them, and they should present a voltage of so much across them, and all these kind of things that they have you do. And you would take your meter and you would go and you would measure it, and you would say, aha, I'm getting the readings that I expected. And not always. You don't always do that. Sometimes you miscalculate. Sometimes you didn't wire it the way you thought you wired it. And you go back. You have to go back. what's gone on here? Why didn't this work the way I thought it worked? And you find out where the mistake was, and you redo the mistake, and you never find that the law didn't work. You never find that Ohm's law was flawed. It worked in most cases, and it didn't work in this one case. There's always an error in the way that we applied it. Always an error either in our mathematical calculations or our physical wiring of the circuit. But after time and practice and experimenting, there was no doubt in my mind, or any student's mind, there was no doubt that Ohm's law was a valid law. That the theory was a good theory. That if I knew any two of the three elements in an electrical circuit, well, I could figure out the third. And I could use this information to further design circuits for specific purposes, to do the things that I wanted them to do. I could take components and build a TV set if I wanted to, because I understood the principles. I understood the basics of how things worked. So when we come to the thing itself, the way it works and what it does, it reveals itself to us to the degree that we accept it, to the degree that we turn our attention to it and our intention to it, and to the degree that we cooperate with it the way that it works. So the theory, if you want to call it the theory, the fundamental law that you want to understand and you want to then prove through experimentation, is very simply that it is done unto you according to your belief. What it does is it corresponds to your belief. That's what it does. In its own example of creation, it cannot doubt its own word. So in the book of Genesis and in other creation myths, when God said, "Let there be," there was. There wasn't a part of God that said, "Will it really happen?" There wasn't a part of God that was surprised when it did happen and said, "Wow, look at that. Look what I did." The divine spoke its word, and it was. Something acted upon that word, and it was. It corresponds to our belief. The hole that we make in that layer of talcum powder that's keeping our finger from getting wet is a hole that we make with our consciousness. See, the only place we're going to know it is in our own consciousness. The only thing we have to work with is our own consciousness, because it is a mental activity. So we decide then, Dr. Holmes tells us that mental work is specific. We decide what it is that we would like to use to prove our theory, to demonstrate that the theory works. This is one reason that it's called a demonstration. What is it that you want to have differently in your life that you will know when you have it? See, you say, "I want to have life." Well, you already have life. See, that's not specific enough. And then you can get too specific. Somewhere in between. What is it that you want to have? What is it that you want to test this power with? What is it that you want to test your ability to cooperate with the power, to work with this power? Think of, the first people building water wheels. Do you build the wheels so that it sticks down in the stream and the water comes from underneath it and pushes it around one way? Or do you build some kind of a chute and have the water coming across the top and have the wheel rolling the other way? And, how fast does the water need to be moving? Do I need to build a dam and kind of make the water go faster through this little narrow area here? All of these other things that people had to do to learn how to cooperate with the law of gravity pushing water downhill in order to get that water wheel to work right. And this is what we're doing when he's talking about what it does, is it works through us according to our belief. It reveals itself to us to the degree that we open ourselves up to have it revealed. We do that by practicing. We do that by deciding. What is it you want to have in your life today? What is it you want to have? And then you use your technique to change your belief, the technique of spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer. And You experiment even with different techniques of spiritual mind treatment. Do you use a 5-step process? Do you use a 7-step process? What's the difference between the two? And all of those things. But my point is that at this point, we consider ourselves to be students. We consider ourselves to be scientists. We consider ourselves to be experimenters. That there's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. How do you know that? Well, the only way you're going to know it is to practice changing your belief and watch your circumstances change. Otherwise, it's just theory. Otherwise, it's just like a bunch of people sitting in a desert saying, there's these things called rivers, and you can put these things called water wheels in them, and they can give you power. We want to get in and we want to apply. We want to apply. We live in an age where our life can be our practice. See, this is the good thing. We're going to talk more about it next week when we get into how to use it. But right now there's a lot of turmoil, if you will, a lot of chaos. We turn on the news and we see all kinds of conflicting reports, and people are for this and people are for that, and people are against one another, and all of these other things. And everybody seems to be trying to get a handle on what they're going to do in order to prevail. And what I suggest is that if we truly understand that there's a spiritual power in the universe that completely surrounds us and is ready, willing, and able to do through us, it can only do through us, but it's ready, willing, and able to do through us whatever needs must be, then that gives us peace and that gives us comfort. Because rather than getting caught up into the clamor of the chaos, we can go back and we can say to ourselves, but what do I want to have happen here? What do I want to experience here? Is there a way for me to cooperate with the spiritual power of the universe and have a different experience today? Can we go within and find the peace that passes understanding? Can we recognize then that everything that is important to us in this life, our health, our relationships, our finances, everything that is important to us is subject to a spiritual law. And it is in our own best interests to learn how to cooperate with that law. What it does is it becomes the thing that is created. It becomes that through our consciousness. If we think about the most important thing we can accomplish in this lifetime, I suggest it is growing closer to the presence. It is turning that spiral up as we continue to grow in a deeper understanding and a deeper experience of the love and the presence of God. And the way that we have to do that is through deliberate intention and deliberate practice. We study so that we get the theory down, and we apply so that we can see how the theory works, and we can see whether we're making mistakes in the implementation or not, just like I found mistakes in the circuits that I wired up. Every day is a day to apply what we know. Every day is a day to grow in what we know. Every day is a day to advance into a more deeper relationship with the love and the presence of God. So as you go forward this week, I invite you, please read that 3rd chapter of the introduction of the textbook. Remember the little picture of, Mr. Wizard having the kids put their finger down into the glass of water, but they're not getting wet because there's something in the way. And keep that picture with you, because you're immersed in the presence of God, but you don't always feel it because there's something in the way. Right? Your old, outdated beliefs. And you have a technique of spiritual mind treatment, of affirmative prayer. You have a technique to drill holes into those old beliefs, to let the light in, so that the light can then continue to dissolve and dispel the erroneous ideas that we hold. Life's a great adventure. Life's an upward adventure. Life is a journey of us really returning home, but returning home in a different way than when we left. The hero's journey. We're not the same people when we get back that we were when we left. We have grown. I invite you to make this year your commitment to your growth. And so it is.